Well, many thanks indeed. We are focusing on the budget as Kenya prepares for the main budget reading that is coming up this week. And joining me right now is a gentleman from PwC, and allow him to introduce himself. Many thanks.
Thank you, Aby, and thanks to your viewers. My name is Mwangi Karanja, and I'm an associate director at PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers.
All right.
Working within the government and public services sector.
All right.
Yeah.
You mentioned government, and of course, it's a big day for the government to release the budgets. Well, we're looking at a budget of about 3.07 trillion shillings.
Yeah.
And the growth in our budgeting cycle is something that the common man has been trying to comprehend. Perhaps let's just start it off from there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the growth over the last maybe 10 years, it's been quite astronomical in terms of growth. We are talking about, I think 10 years ago, we were maybe 1 point something, or just a little bit above 1. So we are talking about now having grown by another 2 trillion over the last 10 years. That's significant, that's massive. But I think just like a normal household, when you want to achieve great things, when you have some objectives, you have to then grow your budget. How you grow it is something else, but at least you need to always grow, because you cannot keep on spending the same amount of money and not wanting to achieve some great transformational kind of agenda.
That's true.
So budgeting is also driven by the desires of the nation, the desires of the policymakers, to ensure that there is a benefit to the citizenry.
All right.
Yeah.
And Karanja, just picking off from your points there, you mentioned that it's not a bad thing to have a country's budget growing, just like you have a domestic home budget, where you say rent is, say, 30,000 shillings. Yeah. Now we're seeing our budget as a country is 3 trillion shillings. Yeah. And looking at President Kenyatta's Big Four agenda, we are seeing specific sectors that he will be targeting. We have manufacturing, agriculture, healthcare, and affordable housing. Yeah. And from what we gather so far from the budget, we are seeing a huge allocation going towards transport and infrastructure, and to some extent security. Yeah. And we're not seeing all the Big Four projects being properly aligned to the budget. Perhaps from where you sit at PwC, what are your expectations around this?
Yeah, we are expecting that the Big Four will indeed be Big Four, because you cannot just talk about Big Four and not allocate finances to the Big Four. Otherwise, it will just be a theoretical Big Four. And so we are waiting to see the details, because definitely he has identified 4 key pillars. Yes. But I think it's also good to realize that it's not just a 1-year agenda. I think it's an agenda for the next 5 years. So do you start small, then you grow it in the 2nd year, the 3rd year, the 4th year? Or do you start on a big bang kind of an approach? Yes. So I believe that there is some thought process that are going on. And then you remember that achieving universal health care, achieving food security and all that can't just happen in vacuum. Yeah. And so there have to be those enabling environment. There has to be infrastructure. There has to be technology. There has to be energy. Yeah, because for you to get all those things moving, you cannot just put all the money in health. Otherwise, you may not be able to achieve. A skewed budget. So I believe, and you remember, it's not a new government. Yes. It's a government that was already coming from somewhere. So they have to finish the projects that they had already started. So SGR, for instance, is in progress. So you cannot just say that now, because I'm now looking at the Big Four, I will forget about transport and infrastructure. Energy was already a big thing, and so therefore you don't expect them to stop. But I think what we expect to see is what are they projecting. Okay, this year you may not start as big as people are expecting, but where do we see you going between this year, next year, and maybe the following 2 years? All right. Yeah. And Karanja, you follow a lot of public sector spending by actually being an authority in that line. Yeah. And looking at this year's budget, like I mentioned, we are seeing a huge allocation going towards infrastructure in the region of over 50 billion shillings. We're also seeing the areas of
security taking a huge chunk of this year's budget. And what are some of the specific areas that we should expect a more of a changed approach in towards funding public sector spending? And also, if you could comment on how do we ensure we strike a balance where all sectors are sort of catered for, just like the analogy you gave us of your home budget.
All the sectors and all the stakeholders are always seeking, a bit of the pie, and the bigger it is, the better for them. And remember, we all have our self-interest. So the various sectors will be trying to see, okay, what do we get out of this? But like I said, I think what the president has done is to look at some key drivers of Vision 2030, some key drivers of the well-being of the Kenyans. And he's saying that these are the key things that I want to target so that by the next 4 or 5 years, I'll have achieved this. However, there are the following things that must be done. Now, security, you remember that we have had our problems with security. And you can never underestimate the need for securing your borders, securing your towns, your cities, and everything. And therefore, we expect to see quite some bit of security funding continuing. Remember, he has been talking about modernization of the police. He's been talking about, even the border on the Somali border. So all those things have to be put in place. At the end of the day, what we expect is a lot of conversations around when we do this, how does it contribute to the Big Four? Okay? And therefore, I would expect there to be very candid discussions, so between the people who are doing the budget and the various ministries. So if you're the security sector minister, you have to prove to me why you think that we need to put in so many billions at the expense of focusing on the Big Four.
All right.
Because then you have to justify that actually it is contributing to the Big Four and not just budgeting for the sake of it.
All right. Yeah. And as we close off this conversation, Karanja, we've also had a big challenge as a country when it comes to pilferage of funds. Yeah. And Auditor General reports show that the country loses about 1/3 of the budget to graft. And how does this really affect economic projects that would have been funded had we had strong institutions in place, or we would have had better checks and balances to ensure we navigate through these murky waters?
And here I can also speak just as just a common citizen in this country. I mean, I live here, I pay tax, and I see the state of our roads. I see the massive traffic jams. I see all the problems, all the garbage that we have, and basically I also feel when I can see when you go to the rural areas or even just some areas in Nairobi where people are living in abject poverty. And you ask yourself, why should we be talking about 3 trillion budgets when our people are living in abject poverty? And therefore, I think that whole issue of we need to ensure that our budgeting does not encourage fraud, but our budgeting is actually supposed to seal off any loopholes. The numbers that have been mentioned, and I know the last few days, the last few weeks, various astronomical numbers have been mentioned.
Yeah. NCPB, NYS, Kenya Pipeline, Kenya Power.
It's unfortunate because it then comes to rob us of what we could have achieved and left for our children. I know we talk about 1/3 of the budget being lost either through corruption or just inefficiencies. And I think that's an area that then we need to look at. And I think I keep on saying that we need to look at it not just from when you're looking at the budget now, but even just you and I as a common mwananchi, what do we need to do? Because I think the Kenyans themselves, we need to address the software. The Big Four is probably the hardware.
All right.
I think we need to deal with our software, our ethics, our honesty, our integrity, because that's where it all starts from. Because the man there in the street will try to cut corners so that they can, get their way around to make quick money, to become rich quickly and enjoy life at the expense of, number one, his neighbor, but secondly, our future generations. So I think that is an area that we need to talk about and that we need to address.
All right.
Yeah.
Many thanks. Sobering thoughts there.
All right. Thank you very much.
Karanja.
Okay.
I know this is the beginning of more to follow. We'll be definitely continuing with our budget coverage in the coming days. Well, for now, that's all we had time for.